I'm here to talk to you guys today about Keizan Zenji, also known as Taiso Josai Daishi, posthumously. And as you see, he was a human being of the 13th and 14th century in Japan, a couple of generations after Dogen. So Keizan is known as the second founder of Soto Zen. It sounds kind of a strange phrase, but we have this a lot in Japanese Buddhism, especially 100 or 200 years after these Kamakura period founders. A second person comes along a couple generations later, and it's called like the midway revitalizer or something like that. Someone who makes some shifts, makes some changes, kind of routinizes the charisma, if you want to get technical about it, of the founder, and really establishes the sect in a certain way. So we can say this about Keizan, certainly. Scholars have said it for generations and generations. So, and it's like when we heard from Gyoke Yokoyama, he said that Dogen, if this is an analogy, if Dogen is like Christ, Keizan is like Peter, who the church is founded on that rock. I got a little caught between talking about religious contexts and social contexts, and I'm going to try to do a little bit of both. There's kind of a large doctrinal or religious soteriological kind of set of problems or solutions that are around at Keizan's time. He's born into this. There are problems that are already existing there in the world of Buddhism. And we could call them problems, we could call them opportunities or things to pay attention to. This word soteriological means how you get saved. Going to hell was a big problem, actually, in the 13th and 14th centuries. And people need to figure out how not to go to hell, and also to teach their followers how not to fall into the three realms of hell-hungry ghosts and animals. And this is like a kind of a background that I think is important to keep in mind. I'm going to talk a little bit about the on a higher level. I'm not sure if that's how to put it, but not talking about hell, but talking more about this kind of a rarefied salvation that we find within Zazen, of just sitting, self-illuminating, and so on. Before we get there, I want to talk. I'm going to just promise this. That second, I'm going to talk about social contexts. That is patronage and how that relates to gender, particularly during this period, and why during the 13th century, 14th century, women were great patrons, financial patrons, backers of temples, of monasteries. They had, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. Also, a context for Keizan was that Dogen had brought this Zen sect, this Soto Zen sect from China, replicating it as closely in terms of the architecture, in terms of the vocabulary, everything else as he could to what he had seen in China. Keizan's mission was to nativize it, localize it, put it into a kind of a Japanese vernacular and idiom. And one of the ways he did this was to promote the use of funerals, especially this is kind of his legacy. He didn't really do this, but quite quickly after this, the Zen sect began to give lay people monastic funerals, which hadn't been done in other countries. And that really caught on until this day. Japanese people who have Buddhist funerals, which is almost everybody, have them in kind of a medieval Zen style, no matter what the sect they're in, more or less. No overstatement, but more or less. Okay. Also, the worship of the local gods was very prominent in Japan throughout the medieval period into the early modern period, and Keizan really promoted this. The co-option, and this had to do with the funeral cult too. The co-option of local gods, of the kami, of the spirits of the place, and so on and so forth, and the an emphasis on ritual, also ritual involving lay people. So these are some things. In terms of Keizan's meditation method, as we've seen in the talks from the last couple of weeks and even experienced, he promoted an approach to meditation that he inherited from Dogen and from other people in Dogen's lineage back into China, called just sitting. Another kind of term for describing this is silent illumination, and it emphasizes enlightenment as a sort of participation in the enlightenment of the Buddha, to put it one way, or to put it another way, an enactment and a realization of inherent Buddhahood, and not the pursuit of something that's extrinsic to oneself. And I think this will sound very familiar to any student of Zen, whether Soto or Rinzai or Obaku or otherwise. We're living at in a latter age now, and from the time of Keizan, from about 150 years before Keizan, the theory in Japan was we've entered a time that had been talked about, but the date hadn't been specified. But in Japan, it became specified as 1052, when it would be really quite difficult and increasingly difficult to practice Buddhism in the traditional way. And we would need to rely on particular methods, special methods, maybe easier methods, maybe more rigorous methods, but it would not do to just kind of try what works for us. We really needed to, it's time for brass tacks, and we needed to choose one thing. And the rhetoric behind this is again around the 13th century, the 14th century, is the rhetoric of the one Buddha vehicle. So different people who had come up in the Tendai sect in Japan kind of struck out on their own during the 13th and 14th century and said, this is the one practice. This is the one Buddha vehicle. And this language comes from the Lotus Sutra, which some of you know. And a model of kind of exclusive practice, a movement towards, and this is after Keizan's time, but it begins here, more priestly intervention too, whatever you may think of that, the idea that priests performing rituals are kind of intrinsic to one's salvation and staying out of hell and so on and so forth. Pure Land Buddhism, saying the name of Amida, Namo Amida Butsu, was a very prominent practice during this period and was emphasized as this is the practice for this time. This is the practice that's made for sinners. This is the practice that's made for people of the last age who don't have the capacity to calm their minds in meditation, to do good, to save themselves by their own bootstraps. They need to rely on the vow of Amida to save us. So that's a really common exclusive practice. Another common exclusive practice is saying the name of the Lotus Sutra, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Some of you guys might be familiar with this mantra. Again, only the Lotus Sutra can save us in this time of kind of exigency, the end of time here. For others, it becomes the practice of meditation. So for Keizan, this exclusive practice we could say is the lineage and zazen. We heard Kakumyo talk about how these roku, like the Denko roku, kind of exhibit a family style of a lineage, a Zen lineage, and this is very much the case here. Maybe for Keizan, this one vehicle is the mind. Maybe the mind is the one Buddha vehicle. For Shinran, a Pure Land follower, he said, I've never said the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, once for my parents, which is a shocking thing to say, because that's really should be the main reason for Buddhist practice, is to save your parents. That's really a really important aspect. And he said, I never say the Nembutsu for my parents. I strive instead for the highest fruit of Buddhahood. And then I can save many, many people when I'm a Buddha. But it's it's the small game versus the big game. So Kakumyo told the story of Buddha Mitra, the ninth ancestor, and when Buddha Nandya sees him, he's this 50-year-old man. He's never gotten out of bed. He's kind of ostensibly disabled or something. He's kind of an invalid. When Buddha Nandya there comes for this fated encounter, there's a star like the Magi coming from where they come from the east. They did indeed. He says, "Come with me," and he says, "Come on, you don't need to stay take care of your parents." He'd been an invalid because he thought he had to take care of parents. He couldn't leave his home and become a monk. He thought he had to take care of parents. He couldn't do it. He was an invalid there. They were taking care of him, but this was why he was stuck at home. So the eighth ancestor says to him, "Your words and come on with me. Your words and your minds are your closest relations. Even your mother or father don't compare with them. Your actions and the way are in accord. The mind of the Buddhas is no under than this." So this is a different reading than we were talking about before, but he's basically saying, go ahead, abandon your parents. And this is a common thing in Zen, especially with mothers. Leave your mother. She will probably be alone and starve to death up there in the mountains without her son to take care of her, but you should go because it's more important. There's a lot of stories that go the other way, where sons are very much involved in taking care of their mothers, and the care of their mothers, especially the posthumous care, becomes the main motivation for religious practice. This is a really common theme in Japanese Buddhism. Yeah, from the start, especially in the hagiographies of great monks. So, for instance, there's a version of the story of the Buddha where I'm not going to go into it right now. It's in the New York Public Library. You could arrange, you could go see it. It's an illustrated biography of the Buddha from the 15th century, 16th century. And basically, long story short, the reason that the Buddha, the Bodhisattva Siddhartha, decides to embark on religious practice, the shock he sees is not the old person, the sick person, the corpse, and the ascetic. He sees birds with in a nest, and the mother and father are taking turns caring for the birds and flying out of the nest and raising the young. And he says to his aunt, Mahaprajapati, why don't I have a mother? Basically, right? His mother died when he was a week old. Why don't I have a mother? And she says, "Oh, I'll tell you. Your mother died. They said we can't tell you. I'm telling you now." And this is his realization. So he dedicates his life to this practice of saving his mother, who he never met. She died when he was a week old, and that's why he becomes a monk, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of stories of Japanese monks also who, either their mother is saying like, "You're not gonna." Don't come back down the mountain because you're enlightened, till you're enlightened, because I'm counting on you to save me, right? That kind of rhetoric, or this other thing. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a digression. Keizan was someone who was very much influenced by women in his life. Myochi, his grandmother, was a lay devotee of Dogen's who would go attend lectures by him. His mother, Akon, also a Kannon devotee. She founded 2 temples, and she was an abbess. And I'll say that Akon, as you'll hear in a minute here, I hope. Akon, his mother, conceived Keizan when she was 37 years old. And in a certain way, he was what would you call that? A bespoken child of Kannon, something like that. He was a child that was born because Kannon intervened and gave a woman who did not have a child, made her pregnant, and so on. Anyway, Myosho was his mother's niece, also. Yes, his first cousin, and she was an abbess. He had a student named Akyu who received his Dharma transmission, the first that he gave to a nun. His great patron was a woman named Taita Sonin, a woman of I guess, kind of warrior, aristocratic warrior birth. I'll call it that. And she was the main patron of his temple Yokoji, which was badly damaged in the earthquake on January 1st this year in the Noto Peninsula. Her mother, Sonin's mother, Shozen, also became a nun under Keizan. And the thing here is that's important to realize, I'm going to really truncate this, is that women's property in Japan, women's rights over property in Japan were really in transition from the, let's say, from the 12th century to the 15th, but in this warrior aristocratic class, especially in the 13th and 14th century, women had property. Women had been lifelong members of their fathers' households. Even after marriage and after death, they'd be buried with their brothers and their fathers and their uncles and so on. There's a move where, on Chinese models and things changes in burial, they begin to become more and more parts of their husbands' families, more identified with their husband's lineage. And there's a shift. It happens over decades, where they really become responsible for continuing their husband's lineage and then spending the rest of their lives praying for him after he dies, and this way identifying themselves with the interests of their sons and their husband's lineage. There's more we could say about this. The point is that during this time, there's laws that are passed that say, okay, women, there's a problem now with women have been giving away property for years and years. It hasn't been a problem. It's been this way. They give it to their daughters, they give it to temples, they give it to whoever. Now it's like they're giving our property to other people's families, and that's a problem. We'll give them lifetime tenures of property. So women would have their fathers, they would have like a stipend, trust fund, I don't know what you would call it, from their fathers that would be usufruct, I don't know if that's the word, that you have it for their lifetime to use it. If they don't use it all, it reverts to their fathers and their brothers, right? So women were doing a lot to use this, to get rid of this property and not have it revert to their natal families. I mean, sometimes they want that to happen, and use it for their own benefit and the benefit of their husbands and their sons and their relatives by giving it to temples. So there's a lot of temples during this time that are founded by women, and that have women patrons who have this disposable income that actually needs to be disposed of within their lifetime. So a historical fluke, if you call it that. I want to talk very briefly, I'm okay still, about some writings of Keizan's. You heard about the Denkoroku, the transmission of the lamp series that he compiled. And so these are tales about encounters between masters and disciples. So basically koans, they're like what do you call it? The material for koans, if you want to call it that. And we heard this great story about Mitra. There's a lot of stories in there from India, China, and Japan. We heard about the Zazen Yojinki from Koun, and this wonderful text that's a very sort of direct and relatable text that seems so modern, because it's about like, here's how to sit Zazen, here's some stuff that might come up, here's some things you might try. If that doesn't work, you might try this. It's very kind of practical and direct and practical. There's another text called the Sankon Sanzen Setsu that I'm not going to talk about, but we could discuss it later, where he talks about 3 approaches to Zazen according to like high, middle, and low capacity. But it's pretty surprising because it's hard to pick really which one he's recommending and try to figure out which one could fit for you. I mean, I guess he's suggesting like there's a style that'll fit for, these 3 should fit each kind of person, but it's a little hard sometimes to figure out which one you are, and it's an interesting text. He has a dream journal and an autobiography, and this really brings up an issue of cosmic time and also this practice of incubation, meaning like going somewhere, often it means sleeping at a shrine and trying to get a dream. It was really common in the ancient world and then in European Christianity too, trying to get a dream for guidance. And this is something that happens sometimes in Japan, and some priests around this 13th, 14th century kept records of their dreams. Myoe Koben is a famous one who kept a diary of his dreams, and some of them are so vivid and wild. And this is true of Keizan as well. Okay, I'm going to read a couple of his dreams, okay, and then we'll close out talking about his dreams. These translations are by William Bodderford, by the way. He's talking about his patron. Lady Sonin, our landlord, invited me here because she wanted to support a monastery. On my first visit, her husband Uno Nobunao helped me search out a site to build a hermitage in the mountains. At that time, I divined this valley as the place for my meditation cushion. We returned to the patron's residence to stay the night. That night, I dreamed that I was squatting on the innermost summit of this mountain. Looking into the distance below, I saw that this spot rose above the peaceful mountains below. In between the sky and the ground, within the valley gardens, suddenly a temple materialized. The several buildings, their roofs lined up in all directions, filled the valley. To the right of where the gate would be, there stood a great hackberry tree, the tips of its branches lushly intertwined. Monks gathered from all directions to hang numerous worn-out straw sandals there. Divining that dream, I understood it as an omen of a superior sight that meant if I resided here, the tattered monks arriving from all directions certainly would pay back the cost of their straw sandals. That is, they'd become very worthy students. Moreover, the following year when I went back to the overlook where I had been in my dream, there was a wild hackberry tree, its growing branches in full leaf. This means the monastery will certainly flourish. The clouds gathered together like congregations of monks. Waters and clouds is a metaphor for monks. When we dug a well, the water gushed out to fill the realm of the river and the lake. How fantastic, how fantastic. Asleep or with open eyes, dreaming or awake, I saw the same thing. Okay, so then he goes on. This is in his diary, and this is in 1312. This is the springtime. He says, Sonin, this is his patron, Sonin awakened her Bodhi-seeking mind and donated the land. On that night, I lodged at the patron's house at Nakakawa. In my dreams, I saw the temple buildings appear, and in front of the main gate stood a hackberry tree with straw sandals hanging on it. From this, I knew that it would be a superior site where monks would repay the cost of their straw sandals. It was a peaceful, quiet place that I wanted to live and live out my life in seclusion. Okay, and I'm not going to... I will go ahead. Since I'm reading dreams, I'm going to go ahead and read this next dream. Because this one's quite, I don't know what. This is remarkable. And this is a bit like some of Myoe's dreams, where, I mean, I don't really remember my dreams. That's a whole other story. But I think unexpected things I hear can happen in dreams. So, okay. He says, Keizan, I moved to this monastery Yokoji as its founding abbot. Ever since having realized the fruit of awakening throughout 500 rebirths, I have appeared in bodily form in order to propagate the Dharma and benefit the living. Bodhidharma appeared in a dream and ordered me to bathe in a pure water flowing out of the rocks at the base of his seat. Bathing in the icy pool, I was naked. He presented me with a kashaya robe, the kesa. Placing it on, I awakened to the Bodhi-seeking mind. The future Buddha Maitreya appeared in a dream and presented me with a blue lotus throne. It transported me through 3 rebirths. He led me flying across the sky. Celestial beings performed music to send off Maitreya. As he led me to the inner palace of the Tushta heaven, I attained the stage of non-retrogression. Shakyamuni appeared in a dream and manifested his bodily form of preaching the Ratnakuta Sutra, he explained the three methods of liberation, namely liberation through opportunity, liberation through mind, and liberation through objects. And there's some more I could say. There's a little story about Keizan's mom and how his miraculous birth and also his enshrinement of his own umbilical cord next to a statue that was of Kannon, that was very much associated with her worship of that deity and with his miraculous birth too. But I'll stop there with Keizan's mentions of these three methods of liberation: opportunity, mind, and objects. So thanks very much for listening, and I'd love to hear any questions that people might have. One thing about prostrations is that they're there in Buddhism, for sure, when it comes into Japan. I don't know this, I bet we can imagine that maybe people were bowing before Buddhism came in Japan. I don't know about these full body prostrations, but bowing, I bet. One thing we read in a Japanese, Chinese chronicle of like what they do in Japan. This is before Japanese history started, before Japanese people had writing. They said, oh, when they see someone important in the road, they say, ha, and they move over to the side of the road and they bow down. And so there you go. You know, this is like 5th century, I guess. So it was going on well before Buddhism came in. Say ha, bow down. So there's that. The appropriation thing's an interesting thing because, like, you could say, I mean, the word that way I've usually heard cultural appropriation right now is like we or y'all with Samboji, by doing prostrations, by like acting Japanese, quote unquote, are doing some sort of cultural appropriation. Maybe you could say the same thing about Japanese folks, kind of bringing on Buddhist culture of bowing and things like that. Although I guess the context is so very different because they were very much in a supplicant kind of receiving position, not a exploitative one. But yeah, there's, sorry to go on and on there. Japanese culture is all over Buddhism. Japanese culture is all over Japanese Buddhism. And that's one of the things I think that people, like a lot of things people say, this maybe except people say that this is exaggerated, but that Keizan is a person who really localizes the Chinese Buddhism that Dogen brings in by promoting the cults of local gods within Soto Zen and by sort of expanding the audience of his teaching beyond heavily resourced people. Although obviously Sonin herself, who gave him this land for the temple, and the people who gave money to build the temple were people with money. But he was famous for kind of creating Soto as quote unquote farmer Zen versus the samurai Zen of Rinzai, for instance. So thank you for that. I would say it was pretty rare. Maybe there were people who were doing it who were like successful at having it destroyed before they died or something like that. I mean, some of the dreams are like, whoa, are you sure that's okay to like just put out there, you know, as a celibate clergy member and so on and so forth. So I don't know. It was not that common. Dreams, there's a thing called Muchu Mondo, which means, Mondo means like those encounters. Answers and questions is all it means. But because of the way Zen is, Mondo takes on a special kind of meaning. But Muchu Mondo means like an encounter in dreams. So sometimes, even if they're not trying to have a dream about something on purpose, like incubation, people will have a dream and the gods will speak to them. An example would be Pen, who was a Pure Land figure, was handing out all these like amulets that say like you're going to go to the Pure Land for sure. And he'd say like, do you really believe? Okay, here's the amulet. All right, great, you're going to the Pure Land. And then he had a dream when he stayed at the shrine at Kumano of the Shinto god of the Kumano shrine came to him and was like, because there was someone who refused to take an amulet. It caused a big problem in his whole like day of proselytizing. He was like, the god said to him, I was that person who refused to take the amulet. I was just appearing as him. That's ridiculous. You can't like decide who's saved and who's not by if they take the paper or not. They're all saved. You're not there. You can't like do it, save them by handing out stuff and then approving or disapproving. So anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't remember why. I don't remember why I said that about Iten, but yes, there you go. No, I do not know. That's why I read it a couple of times because I don't know. I don't recognize that. I don't know what that is. I think it was part of his dream. And here's the three things that he has as kind of like the three ways to approach Zazen, like superior, middling, and inferior. And this is a common way of talking about things within East Asian Buddhism. That's people of superior capacity, middling capacity, and inferior capacity. Here's what he says in the Sankon's Zazen Setsu. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. I'm going to close that door at least. No, here we go. He says, number one, here is the superior sort of Zazen. Don't awaken to the meaning of the advent of the Buddhas in the world. Don't realize the untransmitted mystery of the ancestors. Just eat if you're hungry and drink if you get thirsty. If you run into trouble, go to sleep. Number two, here is the middling sort of Zazen. Let all worldly matters go. Put your various relationships on hold. 24 hours a day, don't be lazy, even for a moment. Number three, here is the lower sort of Zazen. Treasure good karmic connections and release any thought of doing good or evil. Simply express the wellspring of all Buddhas, Buddha nature, through this very heart-mind. So I don't know if that's the same as realization through objects and the mind and the other thing, but I don't know. But I love that thing because I don't know, which one do you think he picks? Which one do you think he likes the best of the three? Superior, middling, or inferior? Does he think like, yeah. Does he think you should just act naturally, go to sleep if you get tired? Does he think you should put everything on hold, work really hard every minute of the day? Or does he think you should trust that you have a karmic connection to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and then just allow your Buddha nature to shine through? The lowest, the inferior way.
One thing I noticed, although I don't have the answer, is that the lowest is disciplining the things around you, disciplining your circumstances. The second is disciplining yourself. And the third seems to be trusting that discipline will sort of work itself out.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because one of his big slogans was Kaizen Ichinyo, Zen and the precepts are one. So that, yeah, I think that he did see discipline, whether that's kind of avoidant discipline of not doing the forbidden things, or positive discipline of doing the suggested things as a natural consequence of the expression of Buddha nature. So yeah.
You spoke of how important the women were in that period of time, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how that's evolved from the 13th and 14th century to, well, it's kind of wide to present day, but yeah, how are the women? Are they as important as they were then in Japan? And yeah, if you could speak to that.
Yeah. You've given me permission to speak really, really, really broadly, right? So the same way we can go back to the 5th century and have these Chinese people reporting, oh, in Japan, they say aha and they bow by the side of the road. If we look at Japanese mythology that starts to be written down in the 7th century, there's a really prominent place for women. They're still kind of pretty clear that it's a patriarchal society, but the person kind of in charge, and this seems to line up pretty well with excavation, archaeological finds of the political reality being kind of power, in some cases at least, and in the case of the clan that arises to power, like powerful kind of shaman queens who people don't really see, but their little brother has contact with the people, but they are really the ones in charge, these women. And also kind of we see evidence of like kind of ecstatic shamanistic dances and possession and things like that. That's largely through the medium of women, no pun intended. Not unrelated to this, maybe. The first 3 ordinands in Japan are women, are nuns. This is, before Buddhism. It's in the 6th century. It's before Buddhism has really even like arrived fully. But there you go. As far as being patrons of Buddhism, it's incredibly important throughout women being patrons of Buddhism and female support for Buddhism, whether they are using their own money that they got from their mothers and their fathers, or money that they have gotten from their husbands in later periods. Women have been really key in this. One of the things that I'll say is that in contemporary Japan, there's a huge, huge, huge problem. Right? And it's like impossible to really overstate this problem. It's overwhelming to really even think about it in a certain sense, of depopulation and of small temples closing left and right. And a lot of these places are just run by the daughter of the temple or the temple wife. And there's ways in which women, whether they're ordained or not in contemporary Japanese Buddhism, and this is actually, there's some scholarship on this in English about the Soto sect in Japan today. But anyway, temple wives, which is maybe for people who don't know about Japanese Buddhism, it tends to be married clergy with children and the whole thing. That temple wives have a huge role in the life of the temple, in like pastoral care to people, everything. So women are incredibly kind of like, central and very much involved in religious life. And and over the centuries, constantly, variously like excluded and harmed by misogyny, and just constantly, and kind of resisting that through various kind of rhetorical means, and so on and so forth. So it's complicated history, but very important, absolutely. And the mothers of monks. I'll just say, I don't know about right now, but in Japan, that story has been more important than it has been other places. We could see, like, if you guys have seen, this is just a plug for a movie. Not just. If you've seen the movie, the film, Why has Bodhidharma left for the West? No, for the East. Why has Bodhidharma left from the West? Well, I'm sorry. Why has Bodhidharma left for the East? Right? Because there's a famous koan that says, "Why did Bodhidharma come from the West?" This is a Korean film that turns the title around that. That's koan for the title. Anyway, it's a great film about three, in a fantasy kind of weird, timeless place, of three Korean Zen monks, a child who's an orphan adoptee, a middle-aged man who's disillusioned with the world, and an old monk who's obviously the wise kind of transcendent figure. But the middle-aged man struggles a lot. He comes from extreme poverty, and he struggles a lot about whether he is going to leave his blind mother down in the city or not. It's very kind of heartrending. Did I say she's blind? Anyway, it's a very that's a good movie. Often, women in Zen stories are that kind of a figure, kind of a mother who's abandoned, or a mother who is kind of a real taskmaster in terms of what we might call like academics. And then also we often get kind of different stories of women. Yeah, so it's complicated.
Can you speak a little more about, I'm so curious about the backdrop of I guess the fear of the hell realms, and then the tightening of these different, I guess not schools, but lineages of Buddhism, and narrowing in on these exclusive ways of doing it. And that sounds like it really, I think sometimes in my mind, I think like Dogen, just Zazen, but it sounds like it really got firmed up with Keizan. And I'm just curious about that whole phenomenon. Would you speak a little more to that?
I may have described it in a way that makes it sound somewhat sort of restrictive and not, let's say, just not good. And it's interesting because the way that it's been historically portrayed, I would say, in the kind of like way that Japanese religion sees itself, or the way we see Japanese religion as scholars who are raised on how Japanese religion sees itself. And this is a view it's being revised variously, but anyway, so the idea that the Kamakura period, from the end of the 12th to the middle of the 14th century, was a time of great expansion of Buddhism to the common people and to women, especially. These things: common people, women, people of all classes. And this is really what's been emphasized, because these are simple practices. These are easy practices. These are practices that those of us who are hard to save, those of us who are living in the last times, can embrace and will be saved by, and so on and so forth. That might not be as true of Zen in certain ways, but still this idea of the end of times, the kind of practice for now has to be the right practice, is something that's very much there. So that's another way to look at it, is kind of an expansion. So one thing you could say about Keizan, and I feel like people have, it's kind of a very general thing to say, but it depends on if we're talking about people within. Anyway, is that he somehow dilutes Dogen Zen, right? I mean, he's still all about just sitting and silent illumination. He talks that talk just fine. He uses the images, the Denkoroku. It's very much in the pattern, right? He's also, and this is the part where it's like too much of a distinction to make, probably, really, but let's go with this for a second. He also makes a lot of connections to local religion, and this is true much more than Dogen in terms of kami worship. And he also makes more overtures to lay people in terms of not yet, I think, in the case of Keizan, providing monastic funerals for lay people. The lay people, it's typical in Japan 100 years later, and especially now, and moving always over the hundreds of years. For when someone dies, this begins in the Zen sect, for them to be ordained posthumously, and then to receive a monastic's funeral, which is much better for staying out of hell. Because that's, I guess, how we got here. We started by saying, let's talk about like not going to hell and things like that. There's a constant counter narrative within Buddhism, call it advanced Mahayana, Japanese Buddhism maybe in particular, that says, and it goes way back, basically that the material reality of hell is not something that should scare you. It's just a product of the mind. Right? I mean, the same thing is true of this world too, right? You can still worry about your 401k and stuff, but nevertheless, right? All the worlds, the 10 worlds are the creation of the mind. This is the hell smashing verse that Jizo or Dizang talked to Mr. Wang. He said, if you find yourself in hell, say this, all the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas, all the 10 worlds are only products of the mind. And then it'll release, it'll dissolve and you'll be released from hell. So there is this kind of counter narrative. At the same time, there's a very strong idea, and I'm not saying that it's insincere, right? Or that it's done somehow, what's the word? Maliciously or something like that. But there's a lot of emphasis on the idea of retribution in the next life and the importance of giving alms in this life, supporting Buddhism, all these things, right? Like Soin herself. Yeah.
What do we do in this plane of existence to prove the odds that we don't wind up in a place we would rather not be?
People know selling indulgences and they know it's wrong and they get so outraged about it. Because we read about medieval China and they said, this is like selling indulgences. I'm like, you guys know about selling indulgences? They're like, yes, doesn't belong in Buddhism. I'm like, you can't say what belongs in Buddhism or what belongs in Christianity. This is how it works. This is part of the thing. So anyway, there are measures, right? Especially with what I just said about karma is karma. And yet, if all of our experience is a product of the mind, then there's a way out just by realizing that. So that's kind of like an enlightenment model in a certain way, even though I don't think Mr. Wang, it depends on him meditating, he's just supposed to say it. That same verse, I'll just say, I'm working on a conference paper right now. That same verse is like written on, among a lot of other things are written on these too, is written on these shrouds that are printed from wood blocks that are placed in the coffin over the dead. Those have the power to save someone, and through the power of mantras, dharanis, and so on, to save someone and not have them have a bad rebirth. Another example of this, and this happened in funerals and putting in coffins, is when you receive the, which was very different in the medieval period, but there's connections. When you receive the rakusu, you also got the lineage papers, right? Kechimyaku, the blood lineage. So this blood lineage connects you to Shakyamuni Buddha and his enlightenment. So your induction into this lineage, your participation in this blood lineage represents the fact that you are already sort of like witnessed and certified and enlightened as a Buddha, right? So a common thing was to put these Kechimyaku documents into the coffin with the body of the deceased. I mean, in that case, they've already been, as corpses, they've been sometimes when they're still alive, right? But often as corpses, they've been tonsured, they've been dressed in monastic robes and so on. So anyway, there's options for getting around this, right? And we're right at time. This is, and so I hesitate to bring it up because people get mad about selling indulgences and about people not being punished who deserve to be punished and these kinds of things. So I just want to leave that aside. And what I'll say is that a common way of explaining this, and I think it's more complex than this, is this, you could call this a cop-out, but a way of explaining this within Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Buddhism in general, Mahayana Buddhism in general, from way, way, way back, is to say that this is skillful means of the Buddha. So skillful means that people are invited to practice. People are invited to a certain way of looking at things. People are invited to kind of even an aesthetic and kind of literary world that encourages a certain kind of a worldview that ultimately is more beneficial than harmful. And that's kind of the promise of Buddhism and this idea of skillful means, the idea that all kinds of different methods by which the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas save, and I'm not saying people don't get saved by the shrouds at all, believe me, but that all these different ways of expression are just kind of different manifestations of the desire to teach and to cross beings over across the sea of samsara. So,
this is the work that needs to be done at the time of funerals. The scrolls.
and after.
And
And after. And so for 7 days, for
yes.
7.
It's
for
never
7,
over.
for 7 weeks, there's intense mourning, and there's more. There's a mourning period usually within Japanese Buddhism from the medieval period of like 35 years, basically, till no one really remembers the person anymore. But it's the ceremonies become less and less frequent over the years, and less expensive because less frequent and things like that. Presumably, there's also a lot of people who are left out of that mode of salvation as ancestors. But we have to leave all that aside for another day. So, thank you guys very much. It was fun being here and talking to you. Yeah.